Chinese, maybe?
Yeah, you're correct on that. Good guess. Okay, so I guess I'll start.
Yes, please.
All right, so first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for your attendance, and I am very grateful for being given this opportunity to share my research on process mining from the organizational perspective. So, oops, sorry about that. Okay, so let's first talk about the background of this research. So when we look at organizations, we can see they have a lot of different business processes established to achieve different business goals. And within these business processes, we have different activities logistically connected, and these activities are carried out by employees in organizations as human resources performing this activity, all these activities. And in the same time, these human resources or these employees are members of different organizational groupings. So these are often described by documents such as organizational charts. So we have organizational groupings such as teams, units, departments, etc. So when we have these two at hand, a question that emerged at decision making is that, is it possible that we can deploy effective organizational structures to facilitate the execution of business processes? So in order to do this, we reckon that managers and organizations will need accurate and timely understanding of their employee groupings, especially in the context of process execution. But this cannot simply be resolved by depending on those high-level anecdotal knowledge in the decision maker's mind. So in this research, we look into a possibility of exploiting process execution data to discover knowledge about employee groupings in order to support such decisions about organizational structures and business processes. So in order to investigate this problem, we look into a subfield of process mining called organizational model mining. So this subfield concerns specifically the organizational structures relevant to process execution. And we review the literature in organizational model mining by taking the three perspectives of model discovery, conformance, and enhancement. So model discovery is the majority, the major focus of the existing research. And by reviewing the literature, we found three major research gaps. So first of all, we found that most of the existing research in organizational model discovery, they concern only the activity dimension when discovering models. So dimensions such as cases and time are often neglected. So these leave the discovered organizational models incapable of describing organizational groups that follow different types of cases or working at different time periods. The second research gap that we found is that the discovered organizational models in the literature, they do not usually describe the involvement of resource groups in process execution. And as such, this creates the challenge of using these discovered organizational models for further analysis on the human resource groupings. And thirdly, we found that there is a lack of a general solution to evaluating the discovered organizational models. So currently in the literature, this is done in an ad hoc basis. And when it comes to the conformance checking of organizational models, we found that none of the existing work directly addresses this issue in terms of organizational models. There are some related topics existing in the broader field of process mining, but they do not consider the concept of resource groups. And for model enhancement, we found that there exists some limited research, but the problem is they concern only the activity dimension. So, sorry about this order. So in terms of the, so in view of these research gaps, we propose three research questions as the primary focus in this research project. So first of all, how do we model and discover resource groupings based on event logs? And then secondly, how do we use event logs to analyze resource groupings in the context of process execution? Our third ultimate research question is, how do we use event log data to enhance resource groupings? And this, we project, will be based on the model discovery and analysis outcomes. So we have established certain research objectives to address these research questions. So now I'm going to briefly walk you over the current progress. So in terms of the first research question, the modeling and discovery, we propose a novel definition of organizational models. And then based on this novel definition, we established a conceptual framework that identifies the different issues to be addressed for organizational model mining and that thus addressing the research gaps that we identified. And then within this conceptual framework, we propose an approach to discovering organizational models from event logs, and as well as a set of measures for performing conformance checking on organizational models. And those include fitness and precision. And in terms of model analysis, we propose a set of measures for quantitatively analyzing organizational models using event logs. So what's new about this new definition of organizational models? So here's a visualization of a toy example. So you can see on the top, as in the literature, we describe the groups and the members of the resource groups. So basically who belongs to which groups. But the novel part in our definition is that we include this notion of capabilities of resource groups, and we use the notion called execution context to describe this part. So this is basically saying, with our organizational model, given a resource group, we can tell that the members of this resource group, what kind of activities they are capable of executing when it comes to process execution. And this context involves the three essential dimensions in process execution, including the case, activity, and time dimension. And then based on this definition, we propose a conceptual framework that covers the different topics, including model discovery, where you can construct an organizational model from event logs. And we also reckon that organizational models can be built by encoding the domain knowledge such that the official organizational structures can be captured. And then given the event logs and the organizational models, we can perform conformance checking to evaluate the models, or performing model analysis to highlight or detect issues related to group performance. And the model analysis results can help explain the conformance checking results or help us to improve the existing organizational models such that we can gain the enhanced organizational models. We also propose a discovery approach that starts with an event log. Then we learn the execution context and convert a raw event log into a resource log, which provides a focus on the resource perspective, and then discover resource groups and use the resource log and the resource groups to profile the capabilities of resource groups and then obtain a discovered organizational model. We can also perform conformance checking and model analysis. For example, for this toy model, we can calculate its fitness and precision with regard to the input event log, and we can tell that it has a slightly lower precision, meaning that it's allowing some extra behavior according to what's in the event log. We can also perform model analysis with this toy model, and we can analyze for each of these resource groups in this model different aspects related to their performance in process execution. For example, we have workload, distribution, and participation. And we are also developing an open source tool that realizes our proposals in this framework. So as you can see, this is a screenshot of the tool where we can discover an organizational model and present it, visualize it, and also present the relevant process model, and then calculates the different model conformance and model analysis measures in numbers for further analysis. So having this framework opens up a lot of opportunities for future research. So we have planned some next steps. For example, we can we're looking at developing a more effective discovery methods to achieve better model quality. And we are also planning about enabling the model-to-model comparison such that people can tell which of the organizational models are better in terms of process execution. And then we are also looking into how do we do process simulation with these new defined organizational models. So this is the end of the presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One thing I forgot is that we will have a poll in the end of the session as for the best presentation. So have that in mind. But now we have two mentors here, I think, both Barbara Weber and Nina Soffer. So I'm not sure who will start.
So I can start with one question, and then I think we can do a little bit of ping pong. So thanks, Jing, for your presentation. I found the presentation much clearer than the paper you wrote. So it seems that there was a very nice clarification process happening in between you wrote the paper and now the presentation. So I found the questions quite clearly formulated, and I'm also now much better understanding where you are heading. So one aspect which I would like to ask, because I mean, discovering an organizational model is one part, but if you want to, I mean, go towards performance, I think knowing the schedules of employees, I think is quite critical. Because so you might have people part-time. If you have a snapshot of a log, some employees might have started somewhere in the middle. And also I think, the complexity of cases can differ substantially. So and that's why I think that that relating, I would say, this organizational knowledge to aspects of process performance are a little bit tricky. On the one hand, because of schedules. On the other hand, because of different task complexities. So just because someone or a group is working on fewer cases doesn't mean they are lazy. Maybe they are just handling the difficult cases. So I'm wondering whether you have thought about those two aspects, the scheduling part and also the effect of I would say, resource assignment strategies that, for example, that difficult cases, for example, go to one group, and how that potentially impacts what you are currently developing.
Thank you.
Wait, before you answer, I'd like to add something to what Barbara said. And yes, first of all, I agree that the presentation is much clearer than the paper. And I think you have some really promising directions here, and very interesting area of research. My question, which really relates to what Barbara was saying, relates to the fact that many times employees are not only devoting their time to one specific process. So there might be many processes in which employees are engaged. Now, depending on what log you have, usually our logs have one process, okay? And if you intend to work using the publicly available logs, naturally, and then you don't even have the domain knowledge to know what's going on outside this process. So you may get a very partial picture unless you plan to take a larger set of logs or so. That's my question.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Pina, for your questions. I think those are very good points. I've thought about this. So I think this arises from the origin of this organizational model mining at its early time, where the existing literature has identified that it's impossible to actually study the whole picture of an organization. So you can always look at a subset of what's happening related to these employees. So here we are not looking at, for example, the example that Barbara gave. For example, we look at the performance of certain employees, found that they are much more lower than the others, then they are lazy. That's not the case. So here we're looking at how we can recover, or how we can discover the different groupings of resources specific to certain processes locally. So when we talk about that, we are of course making this assumption of log completeness. So this log that we are using to discover organizational models should be representative according to those that specific process that we are looking at. But of course that here, when we talk about all these discovery model and conformance checking, we're not saying that the results that we gain from the discovery and conformance checking will be the only reference to make decisions or giving a profile about those resources, but more likely to give the support evidence about those employees working in specific processes.
Yeah, so thank you, Jing, for clarifying. So when you were giving the presentation, I also had the impression that the performance part is a bit out. In the original paper you submitted, especially in the introduction, you motivated what you're doing to some extent with performance analysis. So it might not be that relevant anymore. But then I'm wondering, where are you going to so if performance is not in the focus anymore, what do you think, what are the use cases where the things you're looking at, especially the conformance checking, are going to be used if it's not performance?
One use case that I can think of is very similar to when you think of the resource assignment rules, mining resource assignment rules. So here, in terms of the resource assignment rule mining, in that part, the existing literature is looking more into the individual resources, how the individual resources are related with the activities. So here, if we are looking at this issue from an organizational model mining perspective, we kind of like step up a level and look at groups of resources instead of individuals. So that can give us a picture of not just the linkage between the individuals and the activities. We also have this linkage of groups of resources linking with different types of cases, different types of activities, and working at different time periods. So I think that there are connections, and it's worth exploring that part of process mining for the future support as well.
How do you intend to validate your results? I mean, fitness and precision are okay, but well, you have the log and you have your model. You don't know what's really out there. So how are you going to validate them?
Yeah, I think this comes to the whole research methodology. So thank you very much for your question. We thought about, when we are able to develop certain critical parts in this framework, including the model discovery, including the model conformance checking, and most hopefully, if we can develop some methods of enhancing the organizational models using event logs, we can take this to run some kind of a field test in the real organizations by running a case study, telling them that, okay, here's what we are capable of doing, and we show them what we can achieve using the real life data sets that are open in the process mining world. We show them some of the insights and see if they are willing to provide their data and access so that we can run a case study to verify if there's something that we are missing in terms of all these approaches and measures that we are developing. So this will happen hopefully very soon in this project, but still we are now looking at how we can do some model enhancements so the whole offering of this project is more convincible to people.
So good luck with this. But I think if you go to a real organization, you need to consider the interaction among different processes and employees. that take part in more than one process. So you need to establish some systematic way of looking at the full scope of what an employee does.
Thank you for your advice. I think that's a very valid point that can lift the existing research direction to another level, incorporating multiple event logs and processes in the discovery and conformance checking, etc. Thank you for the advice.
Exactly.
Okay, maybe a last question before we have to go to the next.
So I've just one question regarding, I mean, the existing event logs. Yeah. So how much of what you need for your work is already available in existing event logs, or is there a need for you before you go to the real world to create some syntactic logs in order to do some, I would say, initial validations?
Currently, based on what I have explored, I think in terms of the open data set, we've found that in the BPIC data sets, we have the 2015 and the 2018 logs. They are really good because they identify the departments or municipalities related to the different resources. So that can be a good starting point, and we can dig a bit into the context of those event logs and show what we can do in an experiment settings, and then use that to communicate with people who are interested in such a case study. So those are the two major resources that I have identified at this point.
Okay, thank you all. I mean, we have to go. You can continue the discussion offline or afterwards, maybe in other ways. So thank you very much, both to Jing and Barbara and Fina. So the next presentation is by Mitri Velmurugan. So if you can.
Yes. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes, so please start.
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone, my name's Maitreyi Velmurugan and I am a PhD candidate at the School of Information Systems at the Queensland University of Technology in Australia. Today I just wanted to talk a little bit about my research on designing and evaluating explainable methods for predictive process analytics. So let me just start with a bit of a brief introduction to predictive process analytics. What it essentially is it tries to predict some future state of a currently running business process using machine learning models. There's two phases to predictive process analytics. You've got the offline phase where you actually create the model, and then the online phase where you actually use it. This sounds simple, but it's actually a fair bit complicated because the main data source is event logs, which have that additional complexity of time. So for the event logs and any other data that's being used to be readable to an algorithm, it needs to undergo some quite heavy processing. Additionally, we also have what's called the black box problem of AI when we're using complex machine learning models, which essentially is just the problem is that the models are so complex that a human can't actually read the model and understand its decision making. This can become a bit of a problem because we don't know if the model is making its decisions based on the appropriate factors. Here, for example, someone attempted to build a model to tell the difference between a husky and a wolf, and rather than looking at the animal, it was looking at the background. This seems quite trivial, but actually, if in a real life setting, if it was, say, in the field of law, it could have some serious impacts on someone's life. So those two problems that I mentioned, the black box problem of AI, as well as the multidimensionality of the process data, meaning that what's put into the model is very different from the original event log, it means that a human can't actually understand why a model returns a particular result. This reason for this prediction is unclear, so it hampers decision making. So you don't know what next steps to take if you don't know why the model thinks this is going to happen. And it also makes it a lot harder to trust the model because how do you know it's making its decision based on the right factors? The solution for this is what's called explainable AI techniques. And explainable AI techniques are essentially sort of a way to interpret machine learning models. They come in lots of different flavors, lots and lots of different flavors. So you can have models that by themselves are inherently interpretable, don't need an external interpreter. You can use external interpreters that have different characteristics, that look at different parts of the model, or only work for certain types of predictive models, or try to explain different things about models and so on. So there is quite a lot of variety in explainable AI techniques that are available. So the first question to ask is, given this variety, what is appropriate for this context of predictive process analytics? To answer this, we're going to need to be able to evaluate explainable methods. This is a very well-known framework for evaluations that looks at different levels of immersion in context with regards to explanations. I'm focusing specifically on this last type of evaluation called functionally grounded, where I don't take into account uses of context. I just look at the inherent fitness of the explainable method for the predictive model and data being used. As you can see, this is quite a broad category. So the next question to ask is, what specific evaluation methods and metrics can be used? There are a couple of problems with this. As I said, event logs are the most common data source used. So they've got that additional added complexity of time. And depending on how long the case has been running, it might have more or less events than other cases. So there needs to be quite a lot of processing done to make this readable for an algorithm. So that means that any sort of evaluation of explanations is also going to need to take that into account. Because this event log is tabular data, so data in the form of a table, what I can do is I can look at evaluation metrics for tabular data and then adapt that. But there is no standard evaluation, or there are no standard evaluation methods for tabular data as well. So, or at least methods that can be compared across different classes of explainable methods. So if we want to test different types of explainable methods, I also need to compare them. So I also need to develop evaluation metrics that will allow me to do that. So the overall research problem for my PhD is, how can the fitness of explainable methods be assessed when explaining predictive process analytics? There are three sort of sub-questions under that. Firstly, I need to identify the explainable methods or class of explainable methods that are relevant to predictive process analytics. Secondly, I need to know the criteria to judge what is a good explanation or not. And thirdly, I need to have the evaluation methods and metrics to actually make these judgments. This third research question can then be broken down into two parts. As I said, we don't have any sort of standard evaluation measures or methods for tabular data. So I would need to develop or adapt these first, and then using them, and then adapt them further for event logs. The research methodology I propose to use is design science research. There are three main cycles in design science research. The first is the relevance cycle, which is related to the domain. The problem domain I'm working is predictive process analytics, and any outcomes of my research will also be evaluated in that context. Regarding my knowledge base, I am drawing from both predictive process analytics and the field of explainable AI, and all of the constructs I make will then be added back into this knowledge base that will affect both. As I said, I'm working on evaluation approaches for tabular data as well as for event logs. And finally, the design science or the design cycle is the heart of my research, where I will be creating and evaluating explanations and adapting any evaluation methods that I come up with. I'm splitting this research into three sort of concurrent phases. The first covers the first two research questions, where I try to identify relevant class of explanations and what I'm looking to get out of those explanations. The second phase covers the creation of evaluation methods for tabular data. And the third covers the creation of evaluation methods for event log data. I have already made some progress on this. So as you can see, all three phases are still in progress, but I have completed research question 2. In particular, with regards to research question 1, I've identified several types of explainable methods that are applicable to this context of predictive process analytics, but it is quite a sort of broad range that is available, so I'm still narrowing those down. I've identified 3 main criteria for the quality of explanations, and phase 2 and phase 3, creating evaluation approaches for tabular data and adapting this to event logs, is still in progress. So I'm focusing on this particular subcategory of external interpretation mechanisms, and so I'm trying to narrow it down from there for research question 1. So where that fits in is it fits in the second phase, in the online phase, just after the prediction has been made. The 3 criteria that I came up with for the quality of explanations, they are consistency, accuracy, and timeliness. So to make proper decisions, we need consistent explanations. We need explanations that are accurate, that reflect the black box model accurately, and they need to be timely in order to make decision-making on a schedule. With regards to research question 3.1, so as I said, I started with just standard tabular data, and I am developing approaches for creating evaluation methods. So not necessarily, so developing evaluation methods themselves, but also approaches to actually developing them, looking at, you know, where to start and then how do we start building up from there to create evaluation methods. With regards to research question 3.2, as I said, I've also started some of this. I recently developed a fidelity evaluation method to measure accuracy in black box, for explanations of black box models. So in this particular example, you can see on the slide for 3.1, I started that with just tabular data, and then the example you can see for 3.2, that was for using an event log. So if you attended the forum yesterday, you might have seen my presentation on that. But that was for one particular class of explainable methods. So as I start moving on to other classes, a lot of this will need to be refined. So what I ultimately aim to do with my PhD is I want to have 4 main outcomes. So the first is the proposal of evaluation criteria for evaluating explanations, which you saw earlier. There were those 3 criteria. I would also like to propose a standard approach to evaluating explanations just of general tabular data. And I need this before I can go to before I can finalize the 3rd contribution, which is proposal of specific evaluation methods for predictive process analytics, especially with those specific classes that I've identified as being useful in this context. So this 3rd contribution is a little bit more specific than the 2nd contribution. And finally, the sort of final outcome of my research is for those classes that I have identified and evaluated, I will be conducting evaluations, and I'll be able to provide some guidelines on situations in which to use particular explainable methods or particular classes of explainable methods. So that is it from me for today. Thank you all for listening. I'll throw it over to you guys for questions.
Thank you. And also for this paper, we have the same 2 excellent mentors. So I'm not sure who will start, Barbara or Nina.
I can start now. Okay, so thanks for the presentation. And also when I read the paper, I think that the topic is highly relevant. And this is really something that is needed and may have a good impact. And you raised some really important questions. But I want to ask you something first. Can you explain to me what's an explanation?
Okay.
I mean, yeah. Do you have some formalization of what an explanation is?
No, so I don't particularly have a formal definition for explanations at the moment. So when I'm judging explanations at the moment, I'm looking at outputs of well-known and well-respected explainable methods. So that's how I've been judging explanations, as the output of known and sort of proven methods. Is that what you were looking for, Nina? Or?
Not really, because, well, you have prediction, okay?
Yeah.
And then you have explanation. What do you expect to see in the explanation? And also, explanation, I guess, I mean, it can be evaluated, and you do a lot of effort to evaluate it, and this is very appreciated. But eventually, I believe an explanation should be accepted by humans. So I don't see well how you close this loop, how you get this to the human. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So there are a couple of standard definitions for interpretability and explanations. They actually tend to be quite varied, but the most common one considers interpretability to be interpretability of a model to be something that is understood by humans, so some kind of representation that is understood by humans, and it considers an explanation to be the interface between the human and the interpretation or the interpretation mechanism. So again, maybe it's still
not very operational. I think you need to operationalize this notion and to test it with humans. Okay. So that's on my side.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
So thanks, Nina, for raising that point. Nice presentation, Maitri. Also, I mean, I totally agree with Nina that the topic is relevant. One aspect I'm still struggling a little bit to understand, I was also raising that in the review, is that I'm not fully understanding what, I mean, explainability is not only relevant for processes and process predictions, it's a much broader topic. Yeah. And what I'm still struggling to understand is where are processes, so what in your research is specific to processes, and what is really the field to which you are contributing? So are you just applying existing things to processes, or are the metrics you're developing, is there something which is of broader relevance? And one thing I'm observing in the PPM field, everyone is doing predictions and is using AI, but no one is making an effort to think about the nature of the data and how is it different to other types of data. So is there so what about time series? What about sequential data that are not process data? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, that's an excellent question, actually, and that's one I've also kind of been grappling with throughout my PhD since I started. So when I started, I assumed that a lot of these evaluation methods and metrics were already out there and would just need to be adapted for, as you said, event log data, which has that additional sort of time series aspect to it, that sequential aspect to it. But what I found was that this was actually, even in the field of XAI, there is very little sort of standardized metrics and methods available. So that is why I had to kind of take a step back and split research question 3 into those two parts of something standard, which is a contribution in the field of XAI, but then also adapt that to be something a little bit more process specific that does look at all of those temporal factors and all that sort of thing as well. So I guess you could say I am kind of trying to contribute to two fields at once. Another sort of benefit with this sort of evaluation is once we have the explanations and explainable methods sort of understood, especially in the field of predictive analytics, if we can say, you know, these particular classes of explanations or explainable methods are relevant, this is what we should be using, then these can then go back to predictions themselves, and we can say, you know, we can use these explanations to diagnose prediction models and say these are good models or these are not good models.
And I think it would be, so one recommendation for your thesis, I think it's important to lay that clearly out, because it has implications on what is related literature, and also, I mean, to what you contribute. And I'm wondering whether it would make sense in your case, since you are saying that some of your contributions are even contributions to the field of explainable AI, to also send papers to those communities in order to increase the impact of what you're doing. And also to get challenged by that community who is really, really knowledgeable about how to come up with explanations.
Yeah, thank you for that suggestion. That's definitely been a concern for me and my supervisory team as well. We have also recently started submitting to data mining type journals as well, because as you say, they do have that background knowledge. Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, is there someone else in the audience that would like to have a comment or question before we go to the next? Else we're pretty much on time, so that's good. Yeah. Okay, then we go over to the third presentation, Laurie P9.
Yes.
So if you share your screen, and I saw at least one of the mentors here, so that's good. Okay, please start.
Okay, so good morning or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Laurie Pirnet, and I'm a PhD student from the University of Namur in Belgium. I will present you my research thesis, which is called Data-Driven Strategy Maps, a hybrid approach to strategic and performance management, combining hard data and expert knowledge. Let's jump into what is a strategy map. Well, you have here on the screen a representation of a generic map. The strategy map is a performance tool that is employed by companies. It was created in 2000 by two American authors, Kaplan and Norton, and it's kind of an extension of the Balanced Scorecard. So if you are familiar with the Balanced Scorecard, you will find the four perspectives: financial, customer, business processes, and learning and growth. You have here in the map the indicators of a company that are linked to each other in a cause and effect map. So the arrows here represent the cause and effect between the indicators, which are also called causalities. So what's the issue with strategy map? Well, in practice, strategy maps are created with the intuition and the experience of experts of the company. We can consider this type of data as soft data in comparison to hard data when it's objectively measured. Soft data presents some issues. We highlighted three major issues. The first one is related to the accuracy. Indeed, in order to make their judgment, the experts use heuristics, and it can lead to some biases. The second issue is completeness. It is really time-consuming and costly in order to judge every indicator pair by pair to see if there is a causal relationship. So it can lead to too simple or incomplete strategy maps. And the last and really important issue is the longitudinal perspective that is lacking in the current literature, as it's really time-consuming to gather some longitudinal data. Most of the literature is cross-sectional. However, we cannot really talk about a causal relationship between X and Y if X does not precede Y in time. So as you see here on the graph, the literature on strategy map development, whether the method is qualitative or quantitative, is mainly based on soft data. What we want to address in this research project is to integrate, to include hard data in the process of developing strategy maps. For this, I developed 5 research questions, which I will investigate in 4 different studies. The first study is a systematic literature review. It tries to answer the first research question: what is the state of the art of the literature regarding the practical and methodological development of strategy maps? We will be interested into 3 research questions. First one, the methods. What methods were used? In other words, how do they build strategy maps in the literature? And when are these methods used? Is there any trend in the methods? The second research question is about the organizational context. Who is actually developing the strategy map? What type of company? And why are they doing so? What is the reason and the motivation behind this development? The analysis of this research question will lead to the third one, which is highlighting the gaps and further research direction in strategy map development literature. So I will not go over the whole process, but we have a sample of 75 documents, and the preliminary results show that most of the paper, most of the case studies happened in educational and banking sectors, and most of the documents are based on soft data, and very few of them go to the validation of the causality, so the cause and effect. A second study is a qualitative research. So it tries to answer the question, how are soft data-based strategy maps perceived by practitioners? Why is this question important? Well, the issues I talked about earlier with soft data are acknowledged in the literature by researchers, but we don't really know the point of view of the practitioners. And since it's a practical tool, it is really interesting to know what to develop for them. So we have two questions here. To what extent the potential users of strategy map are aware of a possible bias, and what is their attitude toward this bias? We use semi-structured interviews for this qualitative research. We have the strength in our research is found in the heterogeneity of our sample. I interviewed 10 people from really different backgrounds, companies from different sectors with heterogeneous sizes, and public and private companies to have the most heterogeneous sample. The preliminary results show that these experts, these managers, the potential user of the strategy map, they are aware of a potential bias using soft data in order to build them. However, they strongly disagree with having a data-driven only solution. So this is really important in order to build a future model. The third study of this research thesis is to propose a methodology to use hard data in strategy map development. So how can we build a strategy map based on hard data? Well, this question has been developed and a proof of concept has been presented in a conference in May. So I invite you to go and read it if you want more information on that. We are using hard data in the form of time series in VAR models, so vector autoregressive models, and we use Granger causality test in order to validate or not the causalities between the indicators. So briefly, it is a 5-step process that I developed. The first step is to explore the relationships. The second step is to represent the indicator graphically. The third step is to analyze the time series of the indicators. And then we apply the VAR model and Granger causality test in order to see if there is a causal relationship in order to feed the strategy map. Fourth and last study of this research thesis is to create a hybrid methodology that combines soft and hard data and compare the two. So how can we combine soft and hard data in order to create a strategy map? Why is this question important? Well, it comes from the qualitative research with the practitioners that are not really enthusiastic for a data-driven only solution. So what can we propose here? First step is to create a strategy map with a traditional methodology. So for this, we will use the Mattel methodology, which is really well known in the literature and really fits the requirements for this tool. We will explore the side effects, so the causality between the indicators, and the lagging effect. So the lagging effect is new compared to what has been done in the literature. It will be to ask the experts how long will it take for the effect to happen. And it's kind of try to answer the longitudinal perspective issue that I mentioned earlier. For this, we will need some real data. So we work in collaboration with CAiSE'. CAiSE is the Belgian air traffic controller, and it's responsible for the 5 airports here in Belgium. Once we have this traditional strategy map, the soft data strategy map, we will use hard data in order to validate it or not. So we will use the VAR models and the Granger causality test that I just presented in the last study. And we have 3 outcomes that are possible. Either we validate the links created by the expert, or we invalidate the links meaning that the experts were wrong, thinking there is a causal link between two indicators. And the third outcome is to add unestablished relationships between the indicators, relationships that the experts did not think about. Once we have the two strategy maps, we go to the last research question of this thesis, which is, how does a hybrid method-based strategy map performs compared to the soft data-based strategy map? So for this, we will use a comparison study with K-means as suggested in the literature. To wrap up, here are some challenges that we can take into account in this research thesis. So there are further issues that we can investigate. For example, indicator selection and visual optimization of the strategy map. How many indicators do we put in the map for it to be useful without having an overload of indicators? The second one is to look at causality's strength and direction on the arrows of the map, because it is not anymore created intuitively by the experts. It might need some indication on the arrows of the map. The third one is to look at maybe some other combination for causality and not direct one-to-one causality between the indicators. And the last and very important one is to be very careful about the data quality and availability in companies in order to apply our models. Thank you very much for your attention. Don't hesitate if you have questions or if you have anything that can help this and make this project grow. Thank you.
Thank you. Then over to the mentor, Chun-Oh Yang.
Yeah, hi, Laurie. Thank you for your talk. I think, yeah, it is quite interesting, your PhD. And I'm quite happy to see that I think this presentation compared to your original proposal, I think you've taken my advice. Yeah. Yes, I can see that. I think this, now the question, or you call it activity 4 or 5, and later on, that's very aligned with your hybrid approach. And I think you do need the combination between soft and hard data in this particular context. Yeah, so I have this one question. I started with one question. So you do talk about causality, and the causality that, there's some noise. Yes. Yeah. And so causality is something I think quite challenging, both in statistical field. If you say something causal relation, it's very strong. And people basically, even regression cannot say that it's, a strong evidence for causality, and people probably need to do quite complicated design for experiments. But I think now through your presentation, I guess the concept of causality that you are mentioning here, is that something specific to strategic maps?
The concept of causality here is used in strategy maps as a name, causality, but it goes broader than just this tool. I think in statistic fields, they use some similar, at least, names. I think the financial field use a lot of causalities because the method that I apply with Granger causality test comes from this financial field, for example.
Okay, I think, yes, as I said, through your presentation, I think I start to understand that causality is probably something quite specific to the field. And I think you probably already defined this notion very clear in your thesis, because I think in a broad field that causality is something very strong. And if you say I try kind of like identify causality or actually discover causality or even confirm causality, that's something really challenging. So I think one thing is that you would like to do is to make this very clear, the notion of causality in the context of strategic maps in the domain of finance, so that it does not lead you to, a broad sense of, especially statistical and machine learning causality is really, at the moment, for explainable AI is a new direction. And I think, yes, I think my other question is, as I said, I'm quite happy to see that you now really see this as a hybrid way of integrating both soft data and hard data. They both very clear. Like you can't just fully rely on hard data because then they lost the context, they lost the the input as a software, the expertise that sometimes you can't really take it for hard data. And I think what you mentioned is that you want to use, I like the way you said, a comparison of the hard data driven approach, and then also looking at taking the input and validate with experts. I think one thing, of course, data mining can do is that they provide surprises to people, and which people don't realize they actually exist. I think this you also mentioned, that some of the unestablished relations, and this is super important. But of course, sometimes when you look at what discovered from soft data, hard data, they probably just scientific results, and we really need to be put in the context with the domain expert. So with those people provided the soft data. So what you'll be looking at the soft data is maybe the soft data, some of them can be replaced by hard data, and some of them cannot be replaced by hard data. And I think you mentioned this in your early question about the availability, you want to validate. I think this is your first and second activities. But I think my comments here, maybe a bit of feedback, is that maybe it will be useful for you to look at the soft data and categorize them into whether some of them can be replaced and with a high confidence with hard data, and some of them just cannot, and they need to be considered to actually enhance, extend, and actually provide explanation to the discovery from the hard data. But as I said, my main concern was this. Your original goal was to do a fully hard data driven, and I said, this probably taken that into consideration. I think what you have now, I think that makes more sense. And great. Thank you.
Yes, it does make more sense, and thank you for giving me this review on the research question order, because given the preliminary results of my qualitative research, it really makes more sense that we have to arrive to a combination of soft and hard data, and not propose a hard data only solution, because the organizations are not ready for that, and it might not always apply. As you said, some data could not be replaced with hard data, and I have in mind, I have to explore it, but I have in mind some intangible indicators. For example, satisfaction, which can be measured, but it's not always objective. So there is this kind of data that might be a little bit too intangible in order to be called hard data or use hard data on them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see Gert Pools have a question. So if you unmute.
Okay, yes, thank you, Jan. I'm unmuted. Lori, thank you for a very nice presentation, very interesting research, I must say, completely in line with the vision of your supervisor. But I have a question of a more kind of ontological question, I would say. A strategy map is actually not a strategy, it's a model of the strategy. But then, is a strategy map now a model of the current strategy as implemented in the organization? Because if that's the case, I think this data-driven approach completely makes sense, because we have data about the present and the past, but not of the future. But if strategy maps are seen as a tool to develop new strategy, then I'm not so convinced about the value of data, because we don't have data about the future. So what is your position on this?
Actually, the strategy map can be used both ways. It can be used as a way to formulate a strategy, and it can be used as to control what is happening in the present. So it really depends on the way the company wants to use their strategy map. I fully agree with you that if it is more projective, hard data might not always make sense, because if this is a completely new strategy with new indicators, the information is not stored yet in the company. However, they can still use a strategy map based on hard data in order to make prediction, as they can use it in a decision making purposes. For example, they have to work on some specific indicators. For example, they have to reduce the cost of the money they attribute to formation for their people. For example, this strategy map could say, okay, if you reduce this, it will impact other indicators this way. So it can be still used as a projective tool in order to see what could happen if we play with some predecessor indicators, what could happen to the other indicators of the company, and have this role of saying the links for future effects in the strategy map.
Okay, thank you, Lori. That's very clear. So does it mean that you also are going to use forecasting techniques, like for the data, like predicting the future?
It is not planned yet, but I can add that to my list.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Or it might be future work. Thank you very much for the discourse. Before we start on the last presentation of the session, I just want to remind you that in the end we will do a poll to vote for best presentation. So stay around to do that right after the last presentation, which is Ramona Elali. So if you can share, she's on it. Yes, very good. And start the presentation. And you have to unmute. Ramona, there you are.
Okay, sorry. Hello, I'm Ramona El-Ali, a first year PhD student at Paris 1 University Panthéon-Sorbonne, and it's an honor for me to do my first presentation here. And my PhD work is focused on an intention mining approach using ontology for a contextual recommendations. And in the following, I will be presenting the problem definition, the research question and the challenges, and then the approach and the research methodology. Nowadays, recommendation systems are widely used because it helps businesses to make more profits and gain insights. But however, most of recommendation systems usually relies only on user preferences to make recommendation to the user. However, usually users uses his own intention and strategy to complete his task and doesn't follow a prescribed processes. So intention mining, which is an evolving research field that addresses the user intention discovery and analysis, can help in recommendation by using the intentional process model. Therefore, our research work will be focused on intention mining and building an intentional process model that will be used in recommendation, because we believe that intentional process mining models are closer to the human way of thinking and reasoning. So in addition, we believe that also the contextual information can provide us with more useful information, because we believe that the contextual information can also affect the intention of the user and the chosen strategy. And the standard activity logs doesn't contain such information except the time, doesn't contain the weather, the current happening event, and locations that also can affect the user intention. So our approach will use the combination of the text environment. In addition, we'll use the domain ontology that we'll use to build the intentional process model. So the main objective of our PhD is to provide a new approach to the user to recommend the user by using the combination of the three intention mining, domain ontology, and the contextual information. For the main research question is, can useful recommendation be provided using a combination of the mined intentional process model, the domain ontology, and the contextual information? In order to answer our research question, main research question, it was divided into multiple challenges and sub-research questions that also need to be addressed to answer, to build the recommendation system. First one, how we can combine multiple sources of information such as domain ontology, context information, and with the actual event logs in a form that can be used as input for the intention mining and the recommendation system as output. Second, how we can define an intention mining algorithm that will take as input the different source of logs in addition to the domain ontology. Next, how we will be able to create the recommendation algorithm that will use the intentional process model with the different source of logs. Finally, in order to be able to validate our proposal, we need to know to what degree the recommendation was improved by using the domain ontology, the contextual information, and the intention mining process model. Our approach was defined in order to give us, to respond to our main objective, that is to guide the user by providing them with useful recommendation based on the intentional process model, the user current trace, and the context. So the approach is composed from two phases. The first phase gives us the intentional process model, and the second phase is responsible to give us the recommendation. So in phase one, we will have multiple source of input, the log traces, the contextual information, and a domain ontology. And the intention mining algorithm will process these inputs to give us an intentional process model that is conformed to the MAPS formalism. And this intentional process model will be given as output, will be used as input for the recommendation engine in phase two, in addition to the contextual information and log traces of the user. And the recommendation engine will be process these inputs in order to give us recommendations that are useful to the user according to his current context. So here I will give a simple example on the daily user activity, and for the approach where we'll be using the log trace of a user and the contextual information inside his home with a different sensor, and the activity of a daily living ontology, and that will be given as input to the intention mining algorithm. So we will obtain as an intentional process model maps. For example, if the user has his main intention to reach his office from his home, a sample of intentional process model of maps will be given as output. And then in the phase two, according to the context of the user and current activity trace and intention, the recommendation will be, for example, if it's a good weather and his intention is to reach his office, he will be recommended to go by walking. But while if it's raining, and he will be recommended to go by car. While if he was feeling bad or he's not able to drive, he will be recommended to use public transportation. The research methodology was elaborating using the key principle of the design science research. And it was composed from 4 main phases: defining the problem definition and the research objective, then the literature study, the proposal elaboration and implementation, and finally the evaluation and validation of the approach. And currently I was working on the different related domain of the PhD work, the intention mining domain, ontology, the context information, and all the other related topics to our subject. And I was using the different tools from Disco, the Python library of process mining, and Neo4j in order to be able to proceed in the implementations. And I'm working on a systematic literature review and around 150 articles on intention mining, using a comparative framework comparison for intention mining, using different 4 subjects: the object dimension, the usage dimension, the method dimension, and the tool dimension. And as a conclusion, our approach will provide the user a suitable and relevant recommendation while enacting the system in an intentional way. And in the near future, after elaborating the proposal and the approach, we'll start planning to create the intentional process mining algorithm that will use the different input parameters. Thank you, and waiting for your feedback and comments and questions.
Thank you very much. Mentor here is Gert, which you can start.
Yes, thank you, Jon. Thank you, Ramona, for a very nice presentation. I find your research interesting and also very relevant. At the same time, it's also quite complex because there are many problems that you address, in my opinion. You do not only need to collect all relevant data, you also then need to mine the intentions based on the data. And then next, when you have mined this, you have to make these recommendations. So these are actually 3 problems that you try to solve in one PhD, and that's very challenging in my opinion. But anyway, I like people to be ambitious, so don't stop with these great plans just because of my comments. But I do have a doubt. I'm not yet a believer with respect to intention mining, and I will explain why. We all know that intentions are a good prediction of behavior, and this has been shown in psychology with theories like theory of planned behavior, theory of recent action, but also in information systems, the technology acceptance model, the method evaluation model are all based on these theories that intentions predict behavior. And intentions themselves are strongly influenced by attitudes, beliefs, perceptions, desires, and so on and so forth. And we all know that behaviors can be recorded. We have event logs, activity logs that record the actual behavior of people. And also for intentions, when you utter an intention, it can be recorded. If I tell you now, like tomorrow, I'm going to buy a Porsche or a Ferrari, that's an intention. And maybe tomorrow I will buy one if I win the lottery, for instance. However, if we know behavior, can we also know the intention that precedes that behavior? That's an epistemological question. I'm not sure about this. To give you an example, I'm now giving you feedback because maybe as a senior researcher, I want to advance your career as a junior researcher and avoid that you fall into the traps that senior researchers have been fallen into in the past. But I might also have completely different intentions. So how will you find out what my real intention is? That's my question.
That's why we will take the different contextual information and a domain ontology that will be specific to a specific domain that will contain the different user activities and be able to do the linking between the current activity and the ontology domain and the context information. I don't know if I have answered your question.
Yeah, I'm not yet a believer because it's also not clear to me. This domain ontology, do you consider it like a given in your research, or you take existing ontologies, or is it also the idea to build ontologies in your research? That was not clear to me.
Okay, for now I will be focusing on the daily user activity. So I was able to find two domain ontology, a specific domain ontology specific to the daily user activity, but in the future I might need to provide to create a new domain ontology that will answer our question, because the current the existing domain ontology contain the combination with the different contexts and activities, but doesn't follow. I want them to follow the map formalism that is composed from a section, the intention source and the intention destination, with the chosen with a strategy. So a strategy can be composed from multiple activities. So the most thing that I might need to create a new ontology domain that will be specific to the domain that I'll be working on.
Okay, I think that answers partly my question. I also think that ontologies can clarify and explore the different possible intentions that people can have when they do some action, but I'm not sure whether they also help to find what is the real intention. Okay, if you see what I mean, like if I do not reveal my real intention, how can you ever know what my real intention was? So that is a bit the problem I'm struggling with. And maybe something for you to think about that's more like the research philosophy behind your research, I would say. I have a more practical question then. If you can go to slide number 3. And it's more of a comment actually, but I also want to hear your opinion about this. I hope that other PhD students are present in this session. Personally, I really don't like research questions formulated as, can we do this or that? Because the answer is either yes, no, maybe, or it depends. And that's not very informative. So what I would suggest is use questions like, how can we do something, or why can we do something, but not just can we do something, because that's a trivial question.
Okay.
But you're allowed to disagree. Yeah?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think it's a good comment.
Okay, it's not just a comment for you, because I've seen it in other presentations as well. So the can is a trivial question. Please go for how and why questions. These are really the interesting questions in research. Okay, thank you, Ramona. Jon, that's all for me.
Okay, thank you. Yanis Stirna has a question.
Yes, thank you. If you go to the next slide, I think we see the conceptual design of your And my comment is about when we see the contextual information, and you have nicely depicted that, yes, there are various kinds of contexts around, and temperature and so on. So this comes usually in the form of sensor data and market data, whatever. The trouble is that this data come in a way they come. It's so the nice orange arrows that put the context information into your sprockets, which I suspect is what you're going to do. The nice orange arrows in practice will be something which is what is called context platform. So basically, the problematic with this arrow is that you need to kind of aggregate this. You need to calculate this information before it becomes context, because all these things, they give you raw data. So then you need to
data processing, yes.
Yeah, but it's not just data processing. You need to kind of make it the way you want it. For example, you need to aggregate, instead of temperature points, you maybe need to have averages and all kinds of things according to make it useful. There are platforms that do it. There have been European projects developing them with mixed results. So that arrow alone is not terribly easy. So I don't know if it's a question or comment, but have you thought about it? Maybe that's the question.
It's a good comment that I know that I need to transform maybe the data and to use it in a way that will not be directed at input to intention algorithm, maybe fail to represent it well. You're right about it, yes.
Okay, and then I said Jolita has raised her hand.
Yes, the question is kind of a clarification question. So I see in the slide you generate or extract intentions, but also strategies, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So then you also need arguments for each strategy. How do you do that? You also need to argument which strategy in which situation is recommended. So can you get, how do you get the arguments?
What do you mean by the argument? So,
here I see we have three strategies to go to the intention in the example. So we had used this example, I go to office and I have 3 different ways to do, but this is okay, I know, but to help me, you need to tell me which strategy, which way to go to office today is the best for me and why. So that I call arguments or selection or criteria for the strategy.
Okay, the strategy would be a combination of activities, not a single activity that will be given, the intentional process model will be built according to the domain ontology that will contain the different activities that are related to the domain. With the context information, and accordingly we'll do a map linking to be able to define the strategies that are specific to this intention.
Domain ontology, I guess domain ontology will help you to identify intentions and strategies. That's right.
Yes.
But domain ontology will not tell you which strategy fits which situation. So here comes your contextual information, but still this contextual information you need to distribute to the strategies, to the right strategy. And well, this contextual information should help you to select the right strategy or the most appropriate strategy in the situation. But this is tricky. You need to, I don't know.
Do you mean Do you mean the combination of the contextual information with the intentional process model?
Well, I guess this contextual information will help you to argument which strategy is to be selected at which situation. So, but this is not completely automated, I guess.
Thanks. Sorry, I was breaking in. Selmin, you have a hand up if you have a very short question.
It's not a question, it's very short. It's just a comment and recommendation to Ramona. I recommend her to read 2 PhD theses, among others, the one of Judith Barrios and the one of Yolita Ralite, which has been both defended at CRI in the lab in Varua 20 years ago. Okay, so Yolita Ralite and Judith Barrios, both with a J, Yolita and Judith.
Send her an email on the links. Probably. Thank you. Before we break for lunch,